Greetings. My name's Norm Vaughn, and I'd like to begin by apologizing I can't be with you today. I'm away on a family holiday. We're trying to enjoy some of the summer this year. So, what I'd like to do today is focus on three areas. The first area is around the concept of student engagement, what the roles of a successful teacher are, specifically in a blended environment. And where we're going to spend most of our time in the presentation today is what's the connection between the two. Again, I'd like to focus on student engagement, where I'm going to hand it over to Gary for a think, pair, share. I'd like you to really focus on what does the term student engagement mean to you and your students? And if you could do a think, pair, share using the chat function in the Zoom thing. So we'll press the pause button now and let you in the chat area just what comes to mind when you hear this term student engagement. All right, we're back. And now, what I'd like to do is share some of the thoughts I have around student engagement. And I'm sure they're going to align very closely with the ones you discussed in the chat box. So, first, this is a really interesting fella, Dennis Litke. He's based in New Hampshire, runs a nonprofit organization called bigpicture.org. And what I really like about Dennis is keeping things simple and straightforward. He talks about the 3 R's of engagement. The first R is this idea of relevance, that you're connecting to students' curiosity. They see what they're doing in your course is really relevant to their everyday life. The second R is around the sense of relationships, that they're learning to collaborate, they're working in a community as they go through. Like they say, no person is an island unto themselves. The third one's really important. It's this idea of rigor, this idea of overcoming challenges. There's been a lot of research in this area around challenge based education that students really internalize learning when they're pushed forward. Just when you think of video games, probably the most powerful form of assessment is students, or not students, just anyone moving to a higher level based on the feedback of a video game, or should say a computer based game these days. Next thing is a fella, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, is a Hungarian psychologist, did a lot of writing in the mid 70s. He's the one who really coined the term being in the zone. He's done a lot of work about this idea of flow, where students are completely immersed in what they're doing. They're moving from a surface to a very deep approach to learning. It really is. What we're hoping is to empower, to create environments where students are moving beyond just simple superficial engagement in terms of really learning how to learn, really taking responsibility for their learning. That's what it really comes down to in terms of student engagement. So let's just keep that at the back of our minds then, this idea of student engagement, that students are engaged, taking responsibility for their learning, and move on to the role as a successful teacher. And again, I'm going to hand this off to Gary, and I think Bill's probably going to help him. What we're going to do is set up breakout rooms now in Zoom, and I'd like you to go into the breakout room and discuss with each other from your perspective. What are the roles of a successful teacher? I think we're going to find these roles are true no matter if we're face to face, blended, or online. Please, when you go into breakout room, assign one person to be the reporter so that when you come back out, Gary's able to call on the different groups and you can give feedback about what your group discussed in terms of those roles as a successful leader. So we'll click the pause button now and get you off into your breakout rooms, and then we'll come back. Wonderful. Hopefully, you had a fairly rich, I know it was probably a quick, but a discussion in the breakout room about what your roles are. And from my perspective, this is a really important discussion to have because my experience when we're moving into a blended and an online environment, we just can't do it on our own. We've really got to take a team approach. And this is some interesting work that was done in the early to mid 90s, throughout the 1990s, back when the web was in its infancy. And a lot of us, what we were doing when we were teaching online, we're using discussion forums. And we called this computer conferencing or computer mediated communication. And it's interesting, just looking at work of different scholars here, we've got Zane Burge and Bob Mason from the States, Morten Poulsen from Norway, and a group of folks from my land, from Canada. They're from the University of Alberta, which is in our capital city of Edmonton. And it's interesting, when people looked at this, there came out to be sort of three major roles. There was sort of the organizational or the design role, the social or the facilitation role, and the idea of the intellectual or being the subject matter expert. So we're going to take on those and we're going to build those now. So what's the connection between student engagement and these different roles of a teacher? One of the things that we find is moving from a teacher to a teaching presence. If we really want students to take responsibility for their learning, as the course progresses, we're going to need to share more and more of this responsibility with them, so that everybody's engaged in teaching and learning from each other. So the first idea is, the design and organization. We talked about engagement, how important it is to create relevance right at the beginning of the course. And this is really involved in terms of the curriculum design, in terms of what takes place at the beginning of the course. And we'll talk more about that in the next few slides. The second thing is, my experience suggests a lot of students aren't familiar with how to meaningfully collaborate and work together. So we need to do some work right at the beginning of the course with that. And secondly, how do we gently nudge and push students out of their comfort zone, so that they grow, they develop, and again, they build that confidence to take on responsibility for their learning. So let's go through those. So we've got the design and organization, which is the relevance right at the beginning of the course, helping to create meaningful, we're talking about learning rather than social relationships in the course. And finally, this idea of pushing students, so that students really are learning how to learn and take responsibility for their learning. Okay, let's move to the first category. So design and organization. So Dennis talks about how important it is to establish that relevance right at the beginning of the course. Again, the idea that students should have a sense of curiosity and connectedness with the course. So let's talk about some potential activities about how we can do this. Probably one of the most common things is to do an anonymous online needs assessment survey before the course begins. And here's 5 questions that I commonly use. What's the bottom line? What do you want out of this course? What do you expect is going to happen during the synchronous sessions, moving to blended? What do you expect you're going to have to do by your own outside of class time? How do you think your learning is going to be assessed? And what type of assistance, and this is really important, is to learn that it's more than just the instructor, the teacher, but there's peers, student learning services, things like that. So what I do with this activity is we do it anonymously, probably in the learning management system before the course begins. And then during the first synchronous session, whether it's face to face or Zoom, we go through that. I get them into small groups to discuss the results. So maybe I've got ideally, say, 30 students in a class. I get 6 working on each of those questions and reporting back, so that we start to develop, we co-construct some guidelines for engaging in the course. The next thing I find is really important for me is you can do this in an online discussion forum or in a breakout room within Zoom. Getting students engaged when they start to reflect on powerful learning experiences. It might have happened in a classroom, might be happened in their personal life. But debriefing again as a whole class about what makes learning experiences powerful, and creating a set of engagement guidelines so that we can create that sense of powerful learning in this course. One of I get our students to do, and again, I'm in a teacher education program, is getting them to set some personal learning goals for the course. So obviously, you've got learning outcomes in your syllabus, but getting the students, and it could be done in a blog or it could be just done in a discussion forum, but what are some learning goals for your course? And again, how are you going to know if you met this? What's the evidence? Who's going to give you feedback to see if you miss it? Again, three really basic activities, but just how important it is that we design and we scaffold the learning activities so that students can see that we're building on their learning as they go through the course. The other important thing for me is it doesn't happen overnight. Repetition's important. I'm fortunate I teach in an education program, so we can keep emphasizing things each semester and get them to progressively build from one course to the other. But remember, repetition is important. Most students don't get things the first time. The second R we talked about is the importance of relationships. And again, I think this is so important if we're going to create a sense of community and collaboration is we've got to realize that most students, in my case, I'm teaching undergrads, have not had a lot of prior experience or guidance about how to effectively work in groups or teams. So, one of the things that I advocate really quickly, and again, this is interesting, what is new is old, but a fellow, Bruce Tuckman, did a lot of work in the mid 60s around group development. And you might have heard about this model before. It's 5 stages: forming, storming, norming, performing, and I like to say adjourning rather than mourning. But what I like to do at the beginning of a course, it could be a case study, a provocative reading, but taking students in groups intentionally through the 5 stages of the model so they learn how to work effectively together. And I think this is, again, so important is that students intentionally realize what's happening when they're working in groups and they learn how to agree to disagree. The thing that we've done, and I've got the link to the website here. This is from the University of California at Los Angeles. It was under a National Science Foundation grant, and it used to be free. It looks like there's some sort of licensing agreement. We have a license at our institution, but we find this really important for both the sort of the natural sciences and the social sciences courses. This is a tool that helps students learn how to give meaningful feedback to each other. It's sort of short-term pain for long-term gain. They've got to look at 3 samples of work, sort of really below average, average, and above average, and learn how to give meaningful feedback. And this has been a really effective tool for us to use, whether it's in the natural sciences for lab reports, in the social study sciences if they're doing reports or research activities. So again, just with facilitation, one of the most important things we found is the teachers walking the talk. So again, actions speak louder than words, is that you're really modeling what facilitation's like. You're engaging in the challenging, difficult conversations. Again, situated teaching. At times, you're being a guide on the side, other times, a sage on the stage, but you're really modeling the behaviors, sort of the learning actions that you're expecting from your students in your course. Finally, this idea of rigor, the 3R. Um, Again, this is so important, and this is where I'd really recommend is working with your teaching and learning centers. Again, technology, we can't downgrade it. It's going to be an issue, but the most important thing is not developing more content for your courses, but really developing really meaningful learning assignments and tasks. Challenging problems. This is where I think you really need to talk within your departments or statewide organizations about really sharing meaningful learning activities and assessment strategies for the students. A couple of things that we found have been really important, and again, is this across the board in all courses, is this idea of learning contracts, team contracts, really help students be accountable for their learning. So again, if they're doing group work, individual work, okay, what are the outcomes? What are the tasks? What are the deadlines? How do I know if I'm doing quality work? And what are the repercussions if I don't meet those timelines and deadlines? So in order to help you do wonderful website. I think it used to be at the University of Indiana in Bloomington. It's moved up to Canada now, the University of British Columbia. But just a wonderful website, just a plethora of wonderful ideas about best practices for online team-based learning. Just so important about um, getting students in the mindset. But again, and I'm sure this is the same in competencies in the United States. We have the Conference Board of Canada, and one of the most important things they say is that students know how to effectively know how to work with each other in the workplace in terms of communication, problem solving, collaboration skills. Just on that, again, um, you are the captain of the ship. You're the learning leader. There's a lot of work. It's interesting. Cass Sustein, who's at Harvard University, talks about this nudge factor, gently pushing and nudging students to take risks. Just remember that your course is a learning space. It's not a social space. So, just in conclusion, I know this sounds but this is from a fella, John Hattie, a Kiwi. He's originally from Auckland, New Zealand, lives in Melbourne, works for the University of Melbourne now in Australia. But I love this quote: when we see learning through the eyes of our students, and again, it's not watering it down, but understanding what they're going through. And this is going to be a challenging time for all of us with this COVID. There's going to be a great need for empathy, understanding. We're not watering things down, but there's a lot of challenges happening. But what we're really trying to do is get the students to see themselves as their own teachers, really taking responsibility for their learning and helping and guiding the other students in your course. With that, I'm going to pause the presentation here. Um, and Gary and I'm sure Bill are going to help moderate a Q&A session now. As well, these slides are freely available for either in Google Slides. Make notes, take them, use them any way you want. And after this question side, there's a series of resources that I've found have really helped me. I don't want to overwhelm you with information. Again, we're drinking from a fire hose right now. But my biggest piece of advice is going forward is that moving into a blended and online environment is not a solo sport. This is not like closing your classroom door anymore. The way that we're all going to be successful is to work together, work with our teaching and learning centers, work with our IT departments, work with library services. We're finding just when things happen in March, two most important groups for us is to work with our student learning services and our wellness or our health center in terms of strategies and really helping students and us as well, faculty coping in these difficult times. So again, the other thing is I'll make sure that Gary and Bill share my email address. If you want to follow up with me with any questions, I'd be more than happy to help. Good luck. And again, it's an adventure, but again, the way we're going to get through is by all working together. All the best.